Welcome to Everything Life and Real Estate. Let's get started with our hosts, Linda McKissack and Dana Gentry.
Welcome to Everything Life and Real Estate. I'm Linda McKissack.
And I'm Dana Gentry.
Hey, Dana, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Well, good. I'm so excited. It took us forever, but I am super excited because Dr. Ben Hardy might be one of my favorites. And I'm now kind of mad at him, though, because there are some books that he has that I don't have copies of that I didn't know he had. So,
oh my gosh.
So Ben, if you would kind of kick us off, and I'd love for everybody to kind of hear your backstory. I've heard it because I've been with Genius Network with you before and Dan Sullivan. But I'd love everybody to know the amazing things that you've done and kind of your backstory. So I always like to say you were born, then what happened, Cliff Note version, of course.
Well, Linda, and I'm just getting to know Dana for the first time, but obviously I know you and your story pretty well, a little bit. I know there's lots of it, but yeah. So just to give the Cliff Notes version, oldest of three boys. Grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. My parent, kind of some of the key events, I guess you could say, are my parents got divorced when I was 11 years old, and me being the oldest, it was just kind of a crazy time because my dad became a heavy drug addict actually during my teen years, just very depressed. Amazing man, but just went through a deep cycle, and so there was a lot of chaos in my life from basically ages 11 to 20. Very little stability. High school in general is crazy, for life, but we just did not have an enormous amount of stability. I barely ended up graduating high school. And ultimately what happened was I ended up deciding to serve a missionary experience for my church service, humanitarian service. And that was very huge for me. That was just a life-changing experience, being in a different environment, being able to serve communities and stuff like that. And it was during that experience that I really fell in love with writing. I did a lot of journaling, a lot of processing, read a lot of amazing books, had a lot of great experiences. And that's when I decided I wanted to be a writer. It was a lot of, there's a lot more to it, but this is the Cliff Notes version. So I ended up coming home from that experience and studying psychology, and ultimately decided to study business psychology, which is called organizational or leadership psychology. Failed the first time trying to get in. 15 schools rejected me. A lot of crazy ups and downs, miracle stories along the way. But yeah, so I got into that PhD program in 2014. And it was right around that time my wife and I became foster parents of 3 kids in 2015. I started blogging online in 2015 as well, because I got super committed to my, call it my 10X future self, my future self wanting to be a professional author. And so over those few next years, from 2015 to 2018, we fostered our 3 kids, and this was during my PhD program. And so we fostered our 3 kids to adoption. There was a lot of crazy episodes doing that whole process. The foster system did not like us, did not want us to try to adopt those kids. They were also continuing to visit their parents because, that's part of what you do. And the parents were making all sorts of false promises that they would eventually get their kids back, which would never actually happen. And so it was a very unstable time. During those same 3 years, I became a massively successful blogger. So my blogs got read over 100 million times, and I was able to become a professional author. I wrote Willpower Doesn't Work, which came out in 2018. And so in 2018, we adopted our 3 kids. My first book, Willpower Doesn't Work, came out. We moved here to Orlando now that we don't, our kids weren't owned by the state.
Yeah.
And we also had twins that year. My wife got pregnant via in vitro. So we were doing in vitro and all sorts of stuff, but none of it was really working. And then, the cliche, after we adopt, the in vitro worked. So she got pregnant a month later, and we had those twins the same year. So in 2018, we had adopted 3 kids, had twins. We moved to Florida. My first book came out. That was also the year that I met Dan, and I heard him give his first presentation on Who Not How. And I said, Dan, if you ever want that to be a book, I will write it. So I guess from 2015 to 2023, just to fast forward, these last 5 years have been, I finished my PhD. We had 1 final child, so we've got 6 kids. I've published 5 books since COVID, 3 with Dan Sullivan. Who Not How, The Gap and the Gain, and 10X, as well as two of
Yeah.
my own other books, Personality Isn't Permanent and Be Your Future Self Now. And now we're here at 2023. I got 6 kids. We live in Orlando. I'm writing a different book, and really just happy to talk to you.
Awesome. Okay, what about, isn't there one called About Time? Did you write one about time?
Yeah, that was an ebook right here, Slipstream Time
ebook.
Hacking. This is an
Yes.
ebook. I'm actually rewriting this right now. It's called How to Stretch Time. This is the book
Oh.
I'm writing as we speak.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Well, I'm going on a cruise on Saturday, and I love time habits, hacking habits. I love anything that gives me more time, right? So I was, looking up because I said, I think I know all of his books and I think I have them. And then all of a sudden I looked at that one and it's like, no, I don't. I've got to have that one.
I
So I'm
think
going
you'd
to
like
that
this
one.
book, Linda. I got to send it to you.
Yeah, I'm going to find it between now and then.
You can get it on Audible or Kindle.
Yeah, I'm going to do that on the cruise. I'm definitely doing that because
what was the name of that one again?
It's called Slipstream Time Hacking. It's a kind of a funny book. It was an ebook that I wrote. So this is self-published and self-printed. 500
Wow.
printed. That I did that before I knew the publishing world. I wrote that before I started blogging early 2015, and I just thought you could go walk up and get a publisher. And they were like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "They're like, you don't even have a website. You don't have a blog. You don't know what you're doing. You gotta start from the ground, buddy."
Yeah.
Wow.
That's awesome. Well, when would that one be available for people to get?
Stretch Time. That's going to come out in August of next year. How to Stretch Time.
Nice.
Awesome. Okay, fantastic. We'll definitely have everybody put that on their list. So, kind of walk us through, Who Not How people blew up and people loved. 10X is easier than 2X is, I think, I mean, I like them all. Dan's thinking stuff is just amazing. And then combine it with your writing ability. I think it's magical. So kind of tell us what have you learned from doing all that? I mean, I'm sure you had to learn a lot from, taking somebody else's material and doing it. That's different than you having the ideas in your head. And kind of what have you learned from that process, or what's been the greatest lesson you've got from that? Because sometimes we earn and sometimes we learn, right?
In this case, we definitely learned, and which is why we're not doing more books. But I learned so much. What I will say, one of the major things I learned, which is a huge hat tip to Dan, is Who Not How, and that. So one of the books I recently read, which I love and I suggest to everyone, is called The 80-20 Individual. The 80-20 Individual by Richard Koch.
Okay.
He actually popularized the 80-20 principle as well. And he wrote a book called The 80-20 Principle. He also wrote a book called Unreasonable Success, which is phenomenal. But his book, The 80-20 Individual, is really crazy because he talks about how in any organization, even an organization like Keller Williams, right, or something huge, it's really those few people who are driving almost all the growth. And he actually even talked about Microsoft being a company of like 50,000 employees. And Bill Gates said, if you took away our top 20 people, this company would fall apart. And so like that, the only reason I bring that up, so I'll bring up a few points. One is Dan is very good at applying Who Not How. I'll connect this with that 80-20 individual thing in a second, because I'm learning a lot about how to align with 80-20 individuals and how to team with those, because those people are worth 50 or 100, and so
Yes.
But one thing that Dan did very well is that he actually applied Who Not How. Like first off, he never told me which book to write. I, as an independent writer, came in after hearing him talk about Who Not How. I said, I want to write that book. He never told me how to write it. And so although, yes, a lot of like the core nuggets, I guess you could say, came from Dan, at least half, if not more, of the ideas are actually mine, because I actually I had to write it in my own way as Benjamin Hardy. I could not be Dan Sullivan. And a lot of these ideas are not fully developed. And part of my job as a writer is to actually develop them so that people who are not just in Dan's ecosystem and hear him talk for 80 hours, but like in a book, can get it and take it. My job, honestly, take the ideas and make them 10x. That's how I saw it. And so with 10x is easier than 2x, as much as, like, to me, that idea was actually very underdeveloped when I got to it, but it was developed enough. Dan had plenty of gems, and he has a million ideas that really make going 10x possible. But the actual idea of 10x is easier than 2x, from when I started writing that book, was very underdeveloped. But the idea was so good that I wanted to do it so bad. And Dan just continued to encourage me as the Who to do it. And he, we would go back and forth, and we And so I just, that's one of the things I learned from Dan is just get 80-20 individuals on your team, people
Yes.
who can make things happen and let them do it. Because these books have sold almost, they'll by the end, within a year, they'll have broken 1 million copies and led
Mhm.
way over 1,000 people to strategic coach. And that's more than their sales team does by a long shot. And so I was an
Yeah.
80-20 individual for them, and Dan let me transform. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. That's amazing. We've talked about talent for years in in our company. Gary Keller years ago had a consultant that he found. Actually, he was in Dan's program. And he said, I loved Dan Sullivan, but I was in such pain. My company was in such bad shape that I couldn't afford to stay in and just do the group. I needed somebody to help me quickly. So he found a guy named Bain Henyon, and Bain had created a process to help you figure out who were the right people to put in the right spots and how important that was. So we started learning about talent and 1%ers and how hard they are to find. But when you find them, they just kind of elevate your company to the next level. But had it not been for that process, he went in and evaluated Gary's company, and there was all these red X's. And when Gary walks in the room, he goes, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, those are all the people in your company that aren't going to make it that you've sold franchises to." And he's like, "Oh my gosh, even there's like 1 or 2 green X's and all the rest are red." And he said, "But that's not the worst news." And he said, "Well, what's the worst news?" And he said, "Well, the worst news is you're not a good fit for the CEO. You should go do something else, and let's find you someone who is a 1% person for the CEO role." And honestly, he found Mo Anderson, and that completely turned the company around. And so we've been but it's one of those ideas that's simple but not easy, right? You got to be the kind of person that can attract the 1%ers. Your life's got to be big enough for that 1%er to get all their big goals out of it. All of those things. So anyway, Dana and I could probably talk to you forever on that. What I want to talk about a little bit is which one of your books has been your favorite, and how did you pick what you were going to write about?
I mean, with the Dan books, like I had just finished Who Not How, and I was actually writing Personality Isn't Permanent. And so that book was really important for me to write just because, like, to my core, I'm really interested in human change. Like, to my core, like, if there's something that connects everything, I'm a big believer in the possibility for change and transformation. And so that's something that's really exciting to me, but I'm always kind of looking at different ways to look at that. When Dan was teaching Who Not How, I just really had been drawn to his thinking for a long time. And so I just thought that idea was so unique, and I just thought it was such a good frame that I thought I could see it being a popular book. And so that was just exciting to me. When I was writing that book and really studying Dan's material, I came across The Gap and the Gain, which to me was just a really intuitive model for positive psychology. Like for me, it's it's a reframing tool. And that's really what therapy is all about, is reframing experiences in your past and changing the meaning of them. So framing is really about contextualizing, and it's the context that shapes the meaning of the content,
Yes.
And so whether something's valuable or invaluable just depends on the frame you give it. And so I just thought that The Gap and the Gain was just reading through his material. He never told me which books to write, but in reading and studying all of his work, I just really thought that was a very intuitive model and really beautiful. And so I just thought I could really kind of make that valuable. And then I studied into 10X as well, and just thought that's something I wanted. That one I knew would challenge me. And so a lot of what I write is based on not what I think I'm an expert at, but what I really, really want to learn. And so I really wanted to better understand a lot of these ideas. And so not really a better way to do it than to to join with a master on the subject, and then to for me to go deep into the cave and figure out how to make it happen. So I write the books that I really want to learn, and even my own books, solo books. I felt future self as an example is an extremely important idea, and I feel it's increasingly where the future of my field is in terms of psychology. It's just a big idea, and I want that idea to get out there. The book I'm writing now, Stretch Time, I also just feel like it's gonna be a challenge, like 10X, to do it at the level I want to. And so it's when I write a book, and this is something that kind of frustrated, being a co-author can kind of frustrate people, is I have to really immerse myself. I can't just theoretically do it. so Dan, one of the funny things he said is like, Ben will go deep in the water and we won't hear from him until he needs to come up for breath. Like that's just kind of, Dan is always kind of pithy with his analogies, but like, so the book I'm writing right now, like I haven't done a lot of writing, even though I'm writing it, because like I am trying to understand it and live it and experience it as immersively as I can, so that then I can actually put it together. And my life always changes every time I write a book.
Oh,
Because I'm trying to understand and live it so that I can actually write it experientially, not just theoretically.
Well, on your book, Personality Isn't Permanent, and then Dana, I know you have a great question too. It's interesting because we've studied behaviors a lot in our company. We've used them, all the time. And one of the things that we've always been taught is people can modify their behavior for short periods of time, but they can't do it for long periods of time without sickness, health, headaches, all that stuff. Does that match what you found when you researched Personality Isn't Permanent, or do you see behavior and personality the same?
It's a really, really good question.
That's a good question. Yeah.
Without going way, way deep in the weeds, what I'll say is that I'm actually, this may sound weird, I'm not that interested in personality. I'm actually way more interested in identity. And I think that identity is a far more useful thing to focus on. Personality is more of a byproduct. Personality is kind of like the surface. It's kind of like the crust of the earth, whereas the core is the identity. The identity is actually the driver. And I wrote about that a lot in 10X and in other books, even Future Self. But the identity is the thing that you work on. And if you evolve your identity, then yes, your behavior will change over time, because your behavior comes from your identity. And most people's identity is framed mostly from their past self, not from their, certainly not their 10X future self. And if you're going to go 10X, your behavior is probably going to change. Like,
so is it kind of like,
but that's an emotional process, using the language of the 10X book, letting go of some of that 80% that got you here. That's an emotional process that a lot of people won't go through, that emotionally transformative process to be, to evolve into their future self.
Interesting. Wow.
It takes a lot of emotional stuff to not be so dogmatic about your past, and to let it go, and to recognize you're not your past self. You're also not your present self. Dr. Daniel Gilbert, who's a Harvard psychologist, he said that your present self is as fleeting as the present moment. And so I'm a believer that I'm not the same person I was 24 hours ago. Do I have some of the same habits I had 24 hours ago? Yeah. But like I can, if I actually think about it from a gap gain perspective, right? I can look at myself 24 hours ago and I can say, there's a lot of things I now know that I didn't know 24 hours ago. Yeah. And there's also experiences that have built my confidence, that I've done things that I hadn't done before that. And so I now think I have different possibility for my future than I had 24 hours ago. But that what I'm describing, Linda, is a concept called psychological flexibility.
Okay.
And I believe that most people are not that psychologically flexible. They're not as operating from their future self. They're more kind of caught up in the narrative stories of their past self, and even of their more immediate environment. That yes, for the average person, they're working on behavior change. And if you're working on behavior change, that's not sustainable. It's frustrating. And yes, you will get sick. But if you're working on identity change, where you're letting go of your past self and you're connecting more and more mentally, emotionally, spiritually to your future self, and you're going through the emotional process of letting go of, in the language of 10X, you're letting go of your 80% of stuff that really doesn't matter, which is an emotional thing. You're letting go of a lot of your security blankets and stuff like that. You can evolve very powerfully, and your behavior can change enormously.
Do you see that your identity actually is kind of the becoming of the person that you become? And the more you let go of your past, try things, learn lessons, all that stuff, is that what you're kind of calling identity? Like, I always say, look, it's trying things and the activities and all the stuff we do that allows us to figure out who we can actually become, right? I'm definitely not the person I was before. Dana isn't either, those kind of things. But is that kind of the becoming? The identity is kind of who you become when you're willing to do all those things?
Identity is flexible as well. So like, I believe I have a different identity than I had a year ago. But identity, how I at least understand it, is a few key things. One is it's the story that you have about yourself. It's your narrative. So like, like I have a narrative about my past, and I have a narrative about my future. And so that narrative, that story, is huge in how I'm defining myself. Now, luckily for me and for everyone, I think that story, those narratives can change over time. I can change my narrative about what my past self is and what that means, but I can also change my narrative about my future self. And so a lot of it's getting connected mentally and emotionally to your future self. And when you start to get to a place of really connecting to your future self and who you want to be, you can then start to identify as that person now. That's the idea of being your future self now. Another element, though, of your identity, so there's a definition of identity that kind of encapsulates two big ideas. One of them is that it's your self-beliefs, your belief about yourself and how you define yourself. That's the narrative side. But the second side is it's also those things to which you're most committed to as a person. So like there are certain things I'm super committed to as a person, and those things are going to make up my identity. It could be my religion, right? It could be my relationships. And so like those things I'm most committed to as a person are also going to be a big part of my identity. And I look at those things that I'm most committed to as my standards. And so like there's certain things that I'm super committed to that honestly are probably not that great for me. Like, and you can know your commitment by watching yourself behave. So like if I say that I'm writing a book, but actually I'm just scrolling Facebook, then I'm actually proving to myself that my commitment is actually scrolling on Facebook. And so that reflects my standard, right? As a person. And so I look at identity as two things. It's your story and it's your standards. And as you raise your standards, you're going to have to start saying no to a lot of the things you used to say yes to, which is letting go of your past self for a higher standard. And then that can become your minimum, or that once something's a true standard, it's a commitment. Therefore, it's your identity.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's the difference between, like we just heard with Tim Grover at a talk, it's the difference between being obsessed or just interested.
Yeah. I thought of that, actually, Linda. That was one of the things that I thought of when he was talking about. Okay, well, now I have two questions. So not my original question, but I thought of another one. Do you think, Ben, that you're so passionate about the human change because of the way you were brought up and because of your upbringing?
I think I had experiences that have gotten me interested. Absolutely.
Like throughout life.
I've had powerful experiences going through trial and tragedy and trauma. And also that missionary experience I said, like I went through such deep transformation mentally, psychologically, spiritually, my relationship with God being extremely powerful. And so, yeah, I have, like, I'm in a field of psychology that studies the masses, right? And then we create means and bell curves and stuff like that and say that this is what's true for most people. But I also have experienced outlierish change and know that it's possible, and know that there's certain things, even spiritual things, that can really make the impossible possible. And so those are things I believe in very deeply. And so that, of course, that shapes what I'm interested in and what I study. But my interests change regularly as well. Like, as an example, when I came home from that mission, I did not know that I would be interested in entrepreneurship directly. But entrepreneurship to me is very interesting to me. Not just the fact that people can transform or that they can be leaders that help transform others, but I'm interested in other aspects of it as well. So your interests also do change over time. But that core question, I guess you could say, which is very rooted in my spiritual views and my spiritual experiences, is hugely influential in my interests.
Dan talks a lot about unique ability, and I think one of the things that I always like to watch the backside of what somebody's doing, because I think that's where the real nuggets are. And he's done such a good job, it feels like, of getting people in their unique ability, and especially him. I mean, I want my world to mirror Dan's as far as only doing the things I love, right? And so what do you think as far as unique ability? How does that play in all of this? What is that, in your opinion?
I definitely have different views than Dan about unique ability. He definitely comes more from the cloth of you're born with it.
Yeah.
Which is, I think that there's some truth to that, but that's not how I operate. That's not like I would say that Dan, if he wants to understand his unique ability, he looks to his past self. He looks to his 6-year-old self. Right. Whereas if I'm wanting to understand my unique ability, I'm actually looking to my future self. And I'm saying, who's my future self, and what things do I want to develop? and how do I want to transform to become that person that I want to be in the future. So as an example, even my ability to write the book 10x is easier than 2x. Like, to me, that was based on a future self where, like, I again knew my future self was a different person than I was, but I wanted to be really understanding in leadership and in strategy and stuff like that. And so that future self largely shaped the skills and abilities that I developed. And so I believe, as I wrote in the book, nature, nurture, like, it's probably both, but I'm a lot more of an agency believer. And so, like, I believe in a lot of choice in my future self, and then letting the future dictate what I develop mastery in. Just one example, like my kids, like, honestly, not natural. If we're talking about unique ability purely as natural skill and ability, I would be the world's worst dad. I've got no unique ability in being a dad.
Yeah.
But I also, again, believe in human transformation. I believe that I can become a phenomenal father. And if I look back on who I am now versus where I was even 6 months ago, I have a lot deeper emotional connections to my kids. I'm putting their interests sometimes plenty above my own. And so, I do think that you do have a different perspective of life when you do have kids, and that it isn't solely about just your own bliss. But you can, like, I am interested in bliss, and very interested in going in deep waters and in deep flow on the stuff that I love, and doing the things I want. But I also, so I look at unique ability very differently than Dan, to be honest with you. But I think that even our differing views can lead to similar places, which is developing mastery in the things that you really value and care about, and becoming 10 times better at what you do, and actually watching yourself become phenomenal, and doing very few things at extreme high qualities, and building teams around you. That's really what an 80-20 individual is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I want to go back to one thing then, which was my original question around when you were a massive blogger. We just heard this, and we talk about this all the time, how sometimes people don't go deep enough or stay in something that could be boring because they've done it for so long, to let the next natural domino fall for, like, that next big opportunity. How long were you doing the blogging and the success with that, and how consistent were you with that? Do you feel like it was the next natural domino then for you to become the author and start writing the books from the blogging?
It was not the natural domino. That's kind of a 2x, what I would call 2x approach. That's letting the present dictate what happens in the future. I prefer the 10x way, which is letting the future dictate the strategy in the present. And so it wasn't a natural, organic progression of me going from blogger to author. It was actually me wanting to be an author that led me to choosing to blog. And so it was very strategic. I only really got good at blogging because I wanted to be an author. And so, like, me being an author and getting 6-figure book deals required me to get extremely good at writing, thinking, and honestly building a big audience. And the most effective way of doing that at that time, like, if I was starting today, it wouldn't have been blogging on Medium, because that platform honestly is trash now. And in today's media world, you're a lot better making video. Like, maybe it would be honestly doing a podcast or doing YouTube. And so the context matters a lot as well. But it wasn't like I was just blogging and then the natural progression was to be an author. I was operating from my future self. And so I very deeply want to be an author. And the most effective strategy of getting there, called the 20%, which we use in the book, was to get really, really good at blogging. And I just happened to find, one of the things that we talk about in psychology is what's called pathways thinking. And so I was very open to finding the most effective pathways to getting me to my goal of getting a 6-figure book deal. And that's ultimately what led me to medium.com and developing massive skill and writing viral blog posts. And so once I got to a certain level of huge blogs and having a big enough audience, then I was at a space where I could write an amazing book proposal and get the types of book deals that I wanted. But it was all very planned, very strategic.
I love that answer because it totally shifts my thinking from kind of the natural of let the next domino fall to, like, you went.
That's 2x. 2x is 2x is doing more of what you were doing, maybe in a slightly different way. Like, that's letting the present shape what you do in the future.
Yeah.
Whereas from my view, 10x or future self psychology is letting the future dictate what you do in the present. Letting the future, your future self and what you really want, that next level, be the filter for what you say yes and no to. and for
And
helping you
being
find
really,
those few things that are really powerful and getting really good at those few things.
yeah, just being really strategic about it.
Yeah. And one of the things that Alan Bernard, who's a good friend of mine, he's a researcher who studies decision making, and actually he's spent the last 20 years studying impossible goals. And I referenced some of his work in the same chapter actually that I told Linda's story in the book. But one of the things that Dr. Bernard talks about is just how valuable it is to have impossible goals. Because if you don't believe your goal is impossible, if you believe it's genuinely possible, whether the size of it's possible or whether the timeline is possible, like, yeah, I could, then what that means is that you think you know how to do it. And if you think you know how to do it, then what that means is that you're operating from past assumptions and past knowledge. But if the goal is genuinely impossible, and that doesn't mean, like, I've got massive faith, and so I believe I can make the impossible possible. But what I'm saying is like, I really don't think I can do it in that timeline, or like, I really don't know how I'm going to get there. That's actually the beautiful place to be, is I don't know. And that gets you stopping from being in your past. And then you can actually start to say, well, I know that very few things are going to get me to that big of a goal. And so I got to figure out what those few things are. That's part of finding, the few things that matter, that have really high upside. And so, yeah, it's a journey. It's fun though.
So I guess and then I think that kind of makes you ask different questions.
It makes you look for different things. Dan's whole quote that your eyes can only find, what your brain is looking for, right?
Right.
And so if you're not looking for it because you think it's impossible, then your brain is, in psychology we call it selective attention. So yeah, you're asking very different questions and you're taking them very seriously, and those questions can lead you to really different answers than you were expecting, and those answers are going to look very different from what you've been doing in the past.
Interesting. So true. So real quick, last question I want to ask you on this is, willpower doesn't work. What caused you to want to write that, and what was your biggest discovery out of all that? It really did something different for your life.
One thing that I will just say, like, is, and I think this is really important, is I wrote Willpower Doesn't Work in 2017. So that was 6 years ago. And I will just say I'm not the same person I was 6 years ago. That said, like, I'm not saying I disagree. I might disagree with the book, but what I'm mostly saying is, even the person who wrote 10x is easier than 2x, that was me last year. And so again, like, to the point is, that book is a snapshot in where I was, and is not a snapshot of who I am now. But I will say why I wrote that book is, I wrote that book mostly. Sometimes they say that you should write a book with a single individual in mind. I sometimes do that, and in that case, I actually did write that book for my younger brother. My younger brother, Trevor, who's 2 years younger than me, is one of the most incredibly talented, gifted people I know, but he's had so many struggles. And that book is really about how it doesn't matter how much, like, exertion you, or even desire or talent you have. Like, if you're just, that's not what's ultimately going to make the difference. Like, you can grind away and put a lot of willpower into stuff that moves zero. You know what I mean? And so, that was just an invitation to look at things differently. And in his case, to look at his environment and the people he was around, and for him to realize, like, he's not going to get anywhere if he stays around those same high school buddies, in his case. And that if you really want to go different places, you're going to have to be around different people and in different situations. And so that was more of a look at your context matters more than your effort. And if you're not going to change your context and the people around you, it doesn't matter how much effort you put in. You're not going to get very far. And so, yeah, that was a fun book to write. I won't say anything unless you have follow-up questions about it. But that was why I wrote that book. And it changed my life in a lot of ways, mostly as an author. Like, that was my first major book. I was a lot more arrogant than I am now. Like, I was already seriously a hot shot blogger. And so, like, I expected the book to come out of the gate and sell millions of copies. And, like, I was terrible to my editor, and was not that I was, like, a bad person. I mean, but, like, I was overconfident and didn't know what I didn't know. And the book was not as successful. It wasn't a phenomenal book like I planned for it to be. Although a lot of people do like it. I like it, but it wasn't what I wanted it to be, because I wasn't there yet as an author, and I'm cool with that. I'm great with that. I'm proud of my past self.
what do you think the best, when people that want to write books, what do you think the best use of a book? I mean, we have a book that's been written with McGraw-Hill, and we've gone down that route before, and then I've self-published some different things like that. But I found, for me, really what the best thing about the books is just as a lead magnet to attract the people you want to be a hero to. What do you think? I mean, because I think everybody sets out to think, oh, I'm going to have a really bestseller, and maybe you will, maybe you won't. I mean, I think, to me, that takes a different level of writer to do that. I guess you have to see that as your future. But what do you think are some of the best use? What do books do for people if they want to write one, whether they use a ghostwriter, or they use somebody else, or they do it themselves?
I mean, one thing I will say is that anyone, if they want to hire, applying Who Not How, can get that top tier level book. But that generally for most people means Who Not How, which if you want to make that investment, it could possibly worth that. I believe it was probably worth it to Dan, even though how we set things up, he didn't pay me a dime. But it was probably worth it for him to get a Who, because these books will end up passing millions of copies over time. But I think that, so one of the things we talk about in 10x is easier than 2x is the idea of fitness function. Obviously, this is more of a science idea versus a Dan Sullivan idea, but fitness function is the idea of what are you optimizing for? Like, what's the actual goal? And that was something that Ryan Holiday, who's a pretty successful author, I worked with him on the book proposal for my first book, Willpower Doesn't Work.
Wow.
I've been great friends with Ryan. I don't know if we're great friends anymore, but we were friends, and I really helped him on Medium. Honestly, got him tens of thousands of subscribers and loved his books, and I still think he's an interesting character. But he helped me get my first agent. He helped me write my first book proposal. And one of the things that we talked about was, what is the goal? And I think that this is really important to your question, Linda, because the goal for most books, like at least written by business people, actually is that it's a lead magnet. The goal actually is not for it to sell millions of copies, but the goal shapes the process, and the goal shapes the design. And the unique part, I guess you could say, about the books I wrote with Dan is that they were designed semi-twofold. They were designed, firstly, actually to sell a lot of copies. But secondly, and quite explicitly, they were designed to lead people to strategic coach, which is quite unique and very difficult to do, because usually if you chase two rabbits, you catch none. And that was very difficult for me, was to write books that I believed could sell millions of copies, but at the same time did effectively lead people to strategic coach. But I will say my prior goal, my number one goal, was to popularize the books. And so I just think you have to ask yourself that question of, what is the goal? How can you use this book as a tool to advance your goal? For some people, it's honestly to get speaking gigs. And so they write a certain book for a certain audience, and it might not need to sell even 100,000 copies or 50,000. It still gets them lots of money. Some people will write a small book that sells 10 copies, but it'll make them tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, because it's for those right few people. And so, for some people, it really is to blow up their brand, because if they get a huge brand, then so many things become possible. And so I just think using it as a strategic tool to advance your goal, which may be different from someone else's goal, and just being comfortable. I think that goes back to Dan's idea of wanting what you want, which is just you choosing the goals that are most aligned with you and your own future self. And if a book fits within that, to use the book to advance your own goals, even if that just means growing your business. You don't need to become a household name. And maybe if you're actually trying to become a household name, you're doing the wrong thing, and you'll probably write the wrong book, because that's not really what you want. That's not really what you're going for. And so just being really honest about what's the real why behind this, and let's write the book that advances that why in as most strategic as a way as possible. For me, I really do want to be one of those authors, a Malcolm Gladwell of sorts. I don't really want to be Malcolm Gladwell, but I really do want to be one of those authors that writes big, game-changing books that sell millions of copies. And so that's going to shape me and my goals, but that's not the right advice for someone else. And a book can still be insanely valuable and useful to someone else, even if they use a ghostwriter, even as myself, but it might not be to sell millions of copies. It might be truly to actually just have the most powerful thing that gets those 5 clients or those 10, or just changes their business.
That's a great answer, because really it truly does. It's just what the person wants. Then Linda and I just heard Ryan Holiday. Gary brings him in to speak at our private CEO summit.
Oh, I heard about that. I heard he was in Austin.
Yeah.
He wrote
yeah,
He
we-
wrote about it actually.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, we were there, and Linda and I love him, and we say we always have to take a minute to like debrief and process through after he talks to really just kind of go through everything, because he brings a totally different perspective. But it was great. He did a great job.
Yeah. Awesome. We also had Dr. Henry Cloud recently. Do you know him?
I've read some of his books.
Oh,
Very interesting
Yeah.
guy. Very
We love
interesting
all
guy
of-
on
we love all of
integrity and stuff like that.
Yes. I love
Yeah,
all of
so
his books.
smart. He has his new one on trust. We interviewed him on trust, and it was great.
I'll have to reread that.
Yeah.
You would like that, Ben, because it's from a biblical perspective, and also he mixes in a lot of psychology around just trust. It's great. He did a great job.
Yeah. He has
That's
trust,
awesome.
necessary endings. He actually has a whole lot more
Boundaries.
Than yeah. Boundaries.
He's got a lot of books. A lot
Yeah.
of books. And he's got one called Integrity that's great.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'll put that one on my list. So, Ben, where can people find you and follow you?
I would say two places. One is just benjaminhardy.com. benjaminhardy.com is kind of a single place where people can learn. I do have a YouTube channel, so I like make regular content there. And then I just honestly think the simplest, easiest one is if you have not read 10x is easier than 2x, do it, because we got Linda McKissack in there. And I will tell you, Linda, that I've had some friends tell me that your story really helped them truly understand what it means to go 10x.
Yeah.
So thank you for letting me write that. But yeah, read the book, because I think it's definitely, I think it could be a game changer for you.
Well, it's a game, especially in our industry, Ben, because realtors, for some reason, want to hang on to the 2x. And it's like being dragged through the mud and you won't let go. So I really feel like it's impactful. We're, doing our best to get out to the real estate community, because I think of all the industries, real estate, for some reason, they can leave an industry where they help 10x it and still come into the real estate industry and stay in the 2x. So first of all, thank you for choosing my story, and thanks for writing that. Appreciate it. And I would like for you just to move up the timeline on the Slipstream Time one, if you would.
On the stretch time book.
Yeah, I'm going to read it. I'm going to read everything and listen to Audible while I'm on my cruise next week. So remember, if you have not hit the subscribe button, please go ahead and hit that button now. And the greatest compliment you can give Dana and I is to pass this podcast along to anyone that you think could benefit from these types of conversations. If you have a question, a challenge, or a guest that you think would be good on the podcast, be sure and reach out to us at info@everything life and real estate. And Ben, we want to say thank you very much for your time today, and appreciate all your great knowledge, and probably could sit and listen to you over and over and over and still have more questions for you.
Love to have you back when your new book does come
Yes.
out in 2024.
So actually, we want that commitment now. So
Yeah.
we get that on. We get that in.
I
in
will
writing.
always come hang out. I will always come hang out with you guys.
Awesome. And if there's anything we can do,
I'm a
for you,
huge fan.
Yeah, anything we can do. I enjoyed helping your group, and a couple of them reached out to me afterwards, and so you got a great group of people. Happy to help anytime I can.
So before we go off, I just really, really want to say, if anyone has not read 10x, I'm kind of, Linda's story is crazy. Maybe everyone has heard your story, Linda, and I know that's kind of a soft version of your story. I don't know, but learn about this woman. You know what I mean? I don't know you, Dana. I'm so sorry. But
Hey, Linda has a way better story.
No, she doesn't. But I'm just saying, you don't know.
Totally.
Maybe you do. Maybe you do, because you listen to this podcast. Amazing. I hope that people read that story. It's like, as a writer, if I can find stories like that, it gets me so excited, because it just it gets me excited. It makes me believe more things are possible, but I also just believe it can really open people's doors and open up their minds. And so I hope that they read that story. Anyways, I just wanted to say that.
Be sure to subscribe for more business strategies and tactics to inspire you to live an abundant real estate life. Don't forget to rate and review so we can bring you the best content. Find this and other valuable information at everythinglifeandrealestate.com.